Hi everyone, so we're going to finish up our aquatic biomes here by talking about our oceans and the different environments that we're going to see within our oceans. So we talked about all of the different freshwater options, you even talked a little bit about brackish water, so now we're going to talk more about oceans and our saltwater environments here. So we know that oceans, our currents in our oceans are driven by water temperature, density in the water, wind, and gravity. So one interesting thing, if we remember from our water cycle that we talked about, is our ocean currents in the northern hemisphere, they move in a clockwise direction, and in the southern hemisphere we move in a counterclockwise direction. So this is going to be important because the surface winds and the heat that's generated is going to help transport nutrients and oxygen within our water. So we know that our warm water currents, it makes a difference between warm water and cold water currents of how those waters are going to move. Just like when we talked about boiling water, as that water gets warmer, it's going to move up, and as it gets cooler, it's going to get moved down and cause this movement that we're going to see in our water, which is going to be pretty important here. So some zones that we're going to talk about are horizontal zones going across the top of the ocean. We can see intertidal zones, neric zones, and open ocean. So these are our three horizontal zones that we're going to talk about. And then we're also going to revisit here our photic, which if we remember, our photic zones is where the light is going to reach. Our aphotic zones, where the light is not going to reach, and our benthic zone, which is going to be our ocean floor here. So if we take a look at our three horizontal zones that we're going to talk about, our intertidal, if you think of tide pools, this is where we're going to see really diverse range of animals, fish, crustaceans, birds, all of these different types of animals. We're also going to see very extreme ranges of temperature. So intertidal, it's where our tides are going to be, so that water is going to be moving in and out with the tide. So as that water is in, when we're in high tide, we're going to be mostly covered in water, so our temperature is going to be lower. But as that water moves out and we expose more of the land, our temperatures are going to rise because, remember, the land is going to heat up faster than water will. Our intertidal zone is also heavily with moisture, always moist there as well. And we're going to see variations with salinity. So as that tide is low, we know that we're also going to see some evaporation of that water. And we know when the water evaporates, we are not going to see the salt move with the water. So we're going to see differences in salinity when in high tide and in low tide. Our next zone here is our neric zone. These are very productive kelp forests and coral reefs in these areas. So this is the shallow waters that we're going to talk about here. That would be our neric zone, is those shallow waters. And these are going to provide a lot of habitats and help protect shorelines from erosion. So protect it from that weathering that occurs and that wash away of materials there. Our last ecosystem or zone here is the open ocean. Here we're going to see very low productivity. So our light penetration here is not going to be as high as our intertidal or our neric zones. So we're not going to be able to produce that food. So that plankton is a really big part of the food chain that we see in our open ocean. So that's going to be our biggest source of photosynthesis here in open ocean that we'll see. And then we're going to see a lot of deep sea organisms because our open ocean ranges not just the shallow waters, but our deep waters as well. And we're also going to see these vent communities. If we're going to remember, our vent communities is that ocean floor that we saw. And we're going to see that these ocean communities, these vent communities, I should say, is where those breaks in the plate tectonics take place, where we're going to see that heat coming up from the divergent breaks in the ocean floor. So the ocean is going to absorb a lot of light, and sunlight is usable by plants as it penetrates through the water to only about 100 meters deep into the ocean. So that's about a football field long. If you turn that football field on its side and put it down into the ocean, that's how much usable light that we have in our oceans for those plants, different aquatic plants and phytoplankton, to photosynthesize and create all of that food that we see with our producers. So as much of our ocean's life is going to be concentrated in those shallow coastal waters. So that's going to be really important to know that a lot of our life here is going to be where we see the sun, because a lot of things require that sunlight either for its heat, its energy, its ability to make food. That's why that sunlight is really, really important here. We're also going to see that those connections with those shallow coastal waters is also where we're going to see this connection with our rivers, bringing in some nutrients from there, and also connecting to our nutrients from the land. So seaweed and algae are going to anchor to these rocks where phytoplankton drift on the surface. So these two organisms are going to be anchored where these phytoplankton are going to drift a lot more, and this is going to allow them to be those producers in the open ocean, which is really important. And we're also going to see invertebrates and fish feeding on these plants. So all this life is happening where the light penetrates in our photic zone. So in our non-photic zone, so if we think about it right around here, this is going to be our photic zone. And down here where it's dark and the light does not penetrate is going to be our aphotic zone. And then we remember that the ocean floor over here, this is our benthic zone. So in our shallow waters, we're going to see a really rich supply of nutrients. We're going to see a lot of these plants over here and a diverse amount of animals who are using those plants as resources. Where in our deeper ocean waters, our aphotic zone, these animals have learned to adapt to the darkness and not having the same resources as they would if they lived in the photic zone. So those are going to be some differences that we'll see in these plants and animals of the oceans. So we're going to talk a little bit about coastal wetlands, more of our saltwater coastal wetlands. So coastal lands that is covered by salt water for a part of a time or for all of the time are going to be known as coastal wetlands. So a little bit different than our freshwater wetlands here. So they're still going to provide a lot of habitats and nesting areas for different fish and wildlife like marine birds and crustaceans. But they're also going to be able to absorb excess rain, which is going to protect from flooding. We're also going to see that they filter out pollutants and sediments really well, and they make really good natural area, recreational areas for people, for anyone who wants to enjoy those. So those are some different characteristics of our coastal wetlands, pretty similar to our freshwater wetlands as well, but these are some of the things that these coastal wetlands are going to do for us, that connection. Another wetland type place that we're going to see are estuaries. So estuaries is this meeting area where the river is going to flow into an ocean or an inland sea. And these estuaries tend to be brackish ecosystems. So if we remember what brackish means, it's a mix of salt and fresh water. So this mixture makes a really unique environment here, and ecosystem that these organisms are going to have to learn to adapt to between these different salinities and different temperature changes that we're also going to see. So there are two types that we're going to talk about, these coastal estuaries. Salt marshes is one, and mangrove forests is the second. So like these wetlands, these estuaries are meant to help with flooding and soil erosion, as well as these habitats for the different animals that are going to live here. So a good definition of what an estuary is an area where fresh water from rivers mixes with the salt water from the ocean. So that's a really important difference between lakes and ponds here, is that mixture of salt and fresh water. So these two bodies are going to meet, and these are going to cause a mineral-rich mud and a lot of dissolved nutrients to fall to the bottom of these estuaries and make really good areas for these producers to be able to create a lot of food for the animals that live there. We're also going to see that these are very productive because they are constantly receiving these nutrients from our rivers and our oceans, also being surrounded by land, which is going to protect them from our different harsh waves, different storms, and things like that. So if we take a look, we see our fresh water coming in from the sea, salt water coming in from the ocean, and we're going to see these nutrients traps. And you can see all at the bottom here, a lot of plant life that's developing. We can also see this land that's surrounding our estuary here that is going to allow it to be protected from those harsh waves, from those harsh weathers that we'll see as well. So our two types, we're going to start with salt marshes. So salt marshes are characterized by grasses, sedge, and other plants that have adapted to continual and periodic flooding. And we also see them in temperate and subarctic regions. So the biggest differentiation here is going to be those grasses that we see there and this placement in our temperate and subarctic regions. We're going to see it support a community of different animals like clams, fish, aquatic birds, crabs, and shrimp. All these different animals are going to live here. We're also going to see, like other wetlands, it's going to absorb those pollutants and protect those inland areas, which is really important, that relationship between ocean and land and how they protect each other. And last one here is our mangrove swamps. So differences between our mangrove swamp and our salt marsh, we're going to see it's characterized by these tropical and subtropical temperatures, and also a abundance of these trees called mangrove trees. So these mangrove trees have a really intricate root system that allow them to protect the shoreline, as well as helping with other things like different species here. So again, we're helping with erosion and protecting from damage from the storms. We're also going to see a home to about 2,000 animal species that we'll see in mangrove swamps. So they have a very diverse population of animals here. And lastly, we can see that one sad part here is that these mangrove swamps are being filled with waste and destroyed. And what would be really bad about this is that since we have such a protection with those mangrove swamps, with those mangrove trees creating kind of a cage around the shorelines here, it's really dangerous to lose these and see all of that erosion of that shoreline and having those shores no longer be protected. So it's really important to see those connections of what needs to be done to protect these areas, as well as how those areas affect daily life here. Okay, so that was the end of our aquatic biomes. If you have any questions on these, please reach out and ask.